Have you ever owed someone money and thought, hey, I'll pay it later? Well, imagine that. But on a huge scale. That's the United States right now. As of 2025, America owes over $34 trillion. It's so much money. If you stacked that in $1 bills, it could reach the moon and back, twice, and still have enough left to buy a Lambo. But where did all this debt come from? Did someone lose control of the national wallet? Why does the government keep borrowing? And here's the big question. What would happen if the US actually paid off all that debt? Would the world celebrate? Would anything even change? Today, we'll keep it simple and explain how the US got into this big money mess and whether it can ever get out without selling California on eBay. Let's get started. Section 1. What creates national debt? So what actually creates national debt? It's simple. A country goes into debt when it spends more money than it makes from taxes. Just like if you earn $1,000 but spend $1,500 every month, that extra $500 has to come from somewhere. And for governments, that somewhere is usually borrowing. Governments spend money on many things: military, healthcare, schools, roads, emergency help, the list goes on. But when the money coming in from taxes isn't enough, they borrow the rest. Sometimes debt grows because of big tax cuts. Tax cuts sound good. People keep more of their money. But that also means less money for the government to spend. Other times, debt grows during recessions or crises, when the government needs to spend a lot to keep the economy running. For example, during COVID-19, the US spent trillions to help people and businesses. That added a lot to the debt. Debt can also grow over time, even without a big crisis. If the government keeps spending more than it earns every year, it's like using your credit card too much and only paying the minimum. Sooner or later, the bill gets big. A little debt isn't always bad. It can help in tough times. But if the debt keeps growing and never gets paid down, it can become a serious problem. So now you know, national debt is mostly caused by overspending, tax cuts, and emergencies. And sadly, no, the government can't just delete the debt like clearing your phone storage. Section 2. A quick history of US debt. Now that we understand how national debt is created, let's take a look at how the US debt actually grew over time. The story starts a long time ago. In 1776, when the United States became independent, it already had debt from the Revolutionary War. So yes, the country was born in debt. Not the best start, but it's common for countries that fight wars early on. By 1835, something amazing happened. The US actually paid off all its national debt. For one short moment in history, the balance was zero. But don't get too excited, it didn't last. Just 1 year later, in 1836, the US was back in debt again. You could say the government is really good at spending. From there, debt went up and down for many years, depending on wars, spending, and economic conditions. Let's go through some of the big moments. Before World War II, in 1939, US debt was around $40 billion, but by the time the war ended, it had exploded to $271 billion. That's because wars are expensive, and winning them costs money. After the war, the debt didn't go away. By 1977, it had grown to $699 billion. During these years, the US was spending heavily on things like defense, the space race, and new social programs. It wasn't always reckless spending, but it was spending more than earning. The 1980s to 2000s, debt starts climbing fast. In the 1980s, the US started cutting taxes and increasing military spending again, especially during the Cold War. This pushed debt even higher. In the 1990s, under President Clinton, the government actually ran a budget surplus for a few years. That means it made more than it spent. Debt was slowly being paid down. But then came the 2000s, 9/11, and the War on Terror, 2001 to 2021. After the 9/11 attacks, the US launched the War on Terror, including wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Between 2001 and 2021, these wars cost the US about $8 trillion. That's a big reason why the debt kept growing. The 2008 financial crisis, in 2008, the economy crashed. The government spent hundreds of billions of dollars to save banks and stabilize the economy. more debt. Then came COVID. To help people, businesses, and healthcare systems, the US spent over $5 trillion. That was necessary, but it made the debt jump fast. In 2025, the national debt is over $34 trillion. That's more than the country earns in a year, and it keeps rising. Has the United States ever been debt-free? Yes, but only once, in 1835, and it lasted less than a year. Since then, the debt has always been there, growing slowly or quickly depending on the year. Wars, disasters, and political choices all played a part. So when people ask, can the US ever be debt-free again? History says it's possible. But it's very unlikely unless there's a major change in how the country earns and spends money. Debt, for America, is kind of like a long-term roommate. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's a problem, but somehow it never moves out. Section 3. What is national debt really? So, what exactly is national debt? It's the total amount of money the government owes because it has spent more than it collected in taxes. When that happens, the government borrows money to cover the gap. That borrowed money becomes the debt. It's just like if you made $2,000 a month but spent $2,500. You'd need to borrow $500, maybe from a credit card or a friend. Governments do the same thing, except they borrow billions or even trillions, usually by selling bonds. A bond is kind of like an IOU. Investors give money to the government now, and the government promises to pay them back later with interest. But there's a catch. The more debt the country has, the more it has to spend just to pay the interest. That's money that can't go to schools, roads, or healthcare. Some people think the government can just print more money to solve the problem. But printing too much money causes inflation. That means prices go up, and everyone's money is worth less. So instead of printing, the government keeps borrowing. And the more it borrows, the deeper the debt gets. That's national debt. In simple terms, it's borrowed money the country still has to pay back. Section 4. Who owns the debt and why it matters so? Now you might be wondering, who does the US actually owe all this money to? Well, it's not just one person sitting in a dark room counting stacks of cash. About 2/3 of the US debt is owed to American investors, like banks, retirement funds, and even regular people who buy government bonds. So yes, in a strange way, America owes money to itself. The other part, about 1/3, is owed to foreign countries like China, Japan, and the UK. They loan money to the US by buying bonds too, because it's seen as a safe investment, which is kind of funny, because the US is very deep in debt, but still seen as a reliable borrower. It's like lending your car to someone who's crashed 5 cars, but always paid for the repairs. Now here's healthcare. And if the debt keeps growing too fast, it could make future investors nervous. If people stop trusting the US to pay its bills, the country could face big problems. So, owning debt isn't just about who gets paid, it's about trust, stability, and whether the US can keep up with its own promises. Section 5. Can the US reduce its debt? So can the US actually reduce its debt? Yes, but it's not easy. To lower debt, the government needs to spend less than it earns. That means running a budget surplus, bringing in more money from taxes than it spends on programs. Sounds simple, right? Just save more and spend less. Well, not really. Here's the problem. People don't like giving things up. No one wants their school, hospital, or social benefits cut. And nobody enjoys hearing the words, higher taxes. That's like asking people to eat less cake and pay more for it at the same time. Politicians know this. If they cut spending or raise taxes, they might lose votes. So instead, many just keep borrowing, push the problem to the future, and let the next group deal with it. Plus, in a crisis, like war, a recession, or a natural disaster, the government almost always has to borrow more again. So yes, the US can reduce its debt. But to do that, leaders have to make tough choices, and voters have to accept some short-term pain for long-term gain. And let's be honest, that's a pretty rare combo in politics. Section 6. What if the US actually paid off its debt? So what would happen if the US actually paid off all of its debt? Would fireworks go off? Would Americans get a refund check in the mail? Probably not. In fact, For most people, life would feel pretty normal. The government would still collect taxes, pay workers, and run public services. But here's what would change. The government wouldn't have to spend hundreds of billions each year on interest payments. That money could go to things like schools, roads, or healthcare. Also, paying off the debt would send a strong message to the world. Hey, the US is financially stable. You can trust us. That could help in future crises, like another big recession or emergency. But there's a catch. Even if the US became debt-free, it doesn't mean it would stay that way. One new president could come in, spend like there's no tomorrow, and boom, debt is back. It's like finally losing weight, then celebrating with 5 pizzas. It's easy to undo the progress. So yes, paying off the debt would be great, but staying debt-free is the real challenge. Final thoughts. So now you know the US is over $34 trillion in debt, and it's not slowing down. Some of that came from wars, some from tax cuts, and some from major crises like COVID. But most of it, just the result of spending more than the country earns, year after year. Can it be paid off? Sure, but it would take strong leadership, smart budgeting, and a public willing to accept tough choices. And let's be real, that's easier said than done. Debt isn't always bad, but if it keeps growing with no plan to fix it, that's a problem. It's like maxing out your credit card and only paying the minimum forever. What do you think? Should the US pay off its debt? And who should pay? If you want to learn more, check out our other video where we break down how national debt works in simple terms. If you found this helpful, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more easy-to-understand explainers on big global issues. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.